to Dr. Vockley, who will discuss inborn errors of metabolism and puberty.
All right. So the problem is that with each lecture I'm giving, I know less and less about the topic, which is to say that by tomorrow I'm going to be speaking complete gibberish. I desperately tried to find someone else to give this lecture, and everybody said, well, I don't know anything about puberty and fatty acid oxidation. And I said, well, join the group. Nobody does, except that we all are terrified of it, because in addition to all the wonky things that adolescence does to otherwise perfectly lovely children, it really plays havoc with their energy metabolism, and so I guess I have to say I was an adolescent once. I had a couple of adolescent boys, and I treated some, so maybe I do know as much about anybody. Anyway, where's the chick liquor? Here it is. We're gonna start off by giving some definitions so that we all know what the words are, and then I'm going to review with you my basic understanding of endocrinology. And remember, I'm not an endocrinologist, and I don't play one on TV. My favorite line. And then we'll try to put. I'll make some conjectures about why what happens in adolescents with fatty acid oxidation disorders, and then I don't know. We'll open it up for conversation. Hang on a second, because I can't see anything. I have to see what my slides are here as we're going forward. Okay, so we're going to start with the definitions of what goes on as you hit puberty. So here you can see the overarching description of puberty involves gonadotrophy, which is the activation of the gonads by the pituitary hormone. That's the hormone that's made by the pituitary gland, which is in the brain, it starts making two different hormones that are the essence of puberty: FSH or follicle stimulating hormone, and LH or luteinizing hormone. And you'll see where those come in a second. The second word that we're gonna learn is adrenarche, and that is in males the increase in production of androgens by the now not the brain but the adrenal gland, and the part of the gland that's on the outside called the cortex, so the adrenal cortex. Let's see. Oh, that's right. I'm looking at that. You're looking at that. I'm looking at this. There we go. All right. So the next set of words are the events that describe what goes on during puberty. So we have thelarche, which is the appearance of breast tissue. This is primarily due to the action of estradiol, or the endogenous form of estrogen that's made by the ovaries. Menarche is, of course, the first menstrual bleed. It is. Oh, there we go. Thank you. That helps. Later in puberty. It is the sign of cycling, of ovulation, and uterine lining cycling. during early puberty, it is often not associated with ovulation, and of course it can be extremely variable. Girls just entering menarche can have a cycle and then miss for 2 or 3 or 4 months and then start up. And it oftentimes takes a year or so for that to settle down. This is we'll see the hormonal influences on the menstrual cycle, but the beginning of menarche is typically triggered by the effects of the estradiol on the endometrial lining. The actual menstrual cycle, I'll have a picture of that for you, is this interplay between estradiol or estrogen and progesterone. And both of those are produced by the ovaries, and keep those compounds in mind because those are the compounds that we play around with or variations thereof in contraceptives. And the contraceptives are often in females a treatment for the kinds of nasty events that can happen to young ladies with fatty acid oxidation disorders. Now, the equivalent step in males is spermarchy, not a word that you hear very often, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the time of first sperm production. So this goes back to the effects of that other hormone that I mentioned, the FSH, which stimulates the proliferation of the tubules that transport the sperm, called the seminiferous tubules, and then LH in the male acts directly by stimulating the concentrations of testosterone in the testes, and so you start having the secondary effects of sexual development in the male. And then pubarchy, the final word I think we're gonna learn here today, is the appearance of pubic hair, and the combination of the developmental stages of the breasts, the testicular size and penile growth, and let's get on here. Oh, we're having severe thunderstorm warnings, by the way, out there. The last time I was at a meeting, I was getting warnings about a tornado in Chicago, and it hit. It was kind of interesting. So hopefully we don't have that same experience here. So the combination of categorizing the breast development, the genitalia development, and the pubic hair is what we use to define the stage of puberty, also known as the Tanner staging, and we'll see where that goes. Okay, here's where it gets complicated. You think biochemistry is nuts. This stuff is crazy. And I presume that the endocrinologists say the same thing about biochemistry. So we have one member of my lab, a second-year medical student, who could probably give this lecture better than me, because she's much closer to our first-year physiology course, but I'm going to do the best that I can. It wouldn't matter if I could point to these slides anyway, because there are too many arrows there going in too many different directions. I'm just going to give you the verbal description of what's happening, and hopefully it'll be enough to keep things going. So what is the hormonal cascade that leads to puberty in females? Well, you start getting this pulsatile increase in something called a gonadotropin-releasing hormone by another part of the brain called the hypothalamus, and in females this is the cycling trigger. It stimulates the secretion of the FSH and LH from the pituitary glands, and the FSH stimulates the growth of the ovarian follicle, so the maturation of the eggs. and LH stimulates production of the estradiol by the ovaries. So now we have this interplay between the hormones that are allowing the milieu around the egg to support the growth of the egg, and then the signal for the egg to actually start developing. That estradiol, as I mentioned in the last slide, also stimulates the breast development. But the other really big thing that happens during adolescence is a growth spurt, right? So you have this increase in metabolic demands to allow the need for caloric intake to allow and sustain that adolescent growth growth spurt. Later on, this interplay between FSH and LH and their effects on estradiol will be what stimulates the ovulation and the subsequent menstrual cycle. All right. Now, in males, it's maybe a little bit simpler because you don't have this pulsatile stuff going on. Once you've got everything established. So you do have initially a similar pulsatile secretion of the releasing hormone, the thing that starts things going. But once that cascade starts, now it becomes essentially a steady state affair in males as opposed to the pulsatile effect that continues to be present in females. So that gonadotropin releasing hormone stimulates the secretion of the FSH and LH, and in males, the FSH stimulates the growth of the tubules, seminiferous tubules, which then leads to an increase in testicular volume. The LH stimulates a special cell in the Leydig, in the testes called the Leydig cell, that supports the production of testosterone. And then, of course, that's in the male, that's the trigger for the development of secondary sexual development. But it is also the stimulus in the male for that growth spurt. So both males and females are having the growth spurt, but it's for a slightly different hormonal reason. Now, sometimes during adolescence in males, you get a little bit of growth of the breast tissue, a condition that we call gynecomastia, and that's caused by sort of off-target breakdown or metabolism of testosterone to estradiol. This is a very low level and tends to dampen out as the kids get older. So sometimes you'll see that breast development in very early adolescence in males that then becomes less of an issue. Sometimes it continues and it does require medical therapy, but that's what the endocrinologists do. Let's look next at pubertal timing. And now I can't see that at all, so I got to look down here on my iPad. On the left, we have the growth pattern for females. Now you remember that Dr. Gesman showed the basic metabolic rate and the relative growth rate starting from birth, and you have this in the first year of life, you essentially triple your weight and you double your length. So there's no other time in development where we're growing that quickly. In adolescence, we talk about a growth spurt, but we're talking about inches of growth in a year and not doubling your height. Otherwise, we would all be through the ceiling. In females, that peak growth velocity is somewhere between 11 and 12, and in the U.S. it tends to be closer to 11, and it's actually getting earlier and earlier over time. I think we might have kind of maxed it out but basically what it is related to is nutritional status. And in developed nations with good nutrition, the beginning of puberty, and you can define any of those stages that I mentioned earlier, it happens considerably sooner than it does in third world nations where nutrition is a problem. Once you now get out, you hit that peak, and of course, by definition, it's going to drop off after that. And by the time you hit, usually between 14 and 15, you see a significant plateauing of the growth in females, and after that, it's not zero, but it slows down considerably, and you'll see growth. You can see growth through the late teens and even into the early 20s, but it's quite small. Now Uber Eats wants me. Actually, it's not a bad idea. No, we could all have a pizza. The chart for males is shown on the right, and you can see some differences there. It looks similar to what you have in females. There may be a little bit more of a dramatic kind of idling before puberty hits in. So you've got this sort of a steady growth, and then all of a sudden nothing's happening. And if that is kind of a stall for a long period of time, people get a little bit worried about it. Your pediatrician might say, well, let's do some tests. But more likely than not, what they're going to ask you is, when did you start your growth spurt, either parent? And that tends to run pretty true in families. And so somebody who had their growth spurt at 14 versus 16 or 17 will likely see the same thing happening in their it's true for males and females. But ultimately, you get that pickup again, and you can see here that the maximum growth spurt, the peak growth, is actually probably somewhere between 1 and 2 years later than in a female. So in the females, where we're looking at 11 to 12, here we're looking at 13 to 14, and there's probably a bigger tail on the right side of that curve, meaning that most males will continue to see some growth up to about 20 or 21, and if you're a really late bloomer, as they call them, we have these stories of basketball players who were small when they graduated high school and were superstars by the time they finished college because they grew 6 inches or 7 inches. It's truly the exception, but it does happen. Yeah. Okay. So Tanner staging is that descriptive term that we use, the shorthand to say where are you in your pubertal development. Tanner stage 1 is puberty hasn't started yet. Tanner stage 5 it has, and I'm not gonna read these to you, but these are readily available out there in the internet. And if you want to see them, you can find them readily, and there are photographic equivalents that I tend not to show to parent groups because sometimes there are kids around and parents don't like that. So I just use the verbal form here. We have 2 different things that we worry about relative to puberty in adolescence, and one of those is unique to females, and that's the menstrual cycle. And so here now you see the hormonal changes in the menstrual cycle. Don't get confused. The time scale on the left starts at -14 and goes up to +14, where the two left-hand scales, where the one on the right starts at 0 and goes to 28. So 14 on the right is equivalent to 0 on the two left-hand grants. But you can see that there are peaks of the tier here is releasing hormone to the gonadotropins LSH and FSH, now to the end stage hormones, which are estrogen or estradiol and progesterone, and you can see that FSH and LH have a slightly different pattern, though they both peak at the same time. FSH is elevated early in the where we define as the beginning of the menstrual cycle, which is the stage of bleeding. And then the estrogen and the progesterone paths or tracings are shown in the middle there. And the important thing to keep in mind is you can see that the estrogen is high right in the middle of the cycle, and that is where ovulation is occurring. The progesterone, the job of the progesterone is the estrogen stimulates ovulation. The progesterone keeps or prepares the uterine lining to take the fertilized egg if that happens, and now provide an environment in which it can develop. And so you see the estrogen peak first. That's ovulation. It starts dropping. Progesterone starts going up, and then if implantation doesn't occur, progesterone starts dropping, and that's when you start getting sloughing of the uterine lining. And that's important to remember, because now what we have to talk about are when do symptoms happen as puberty starts and during the menstrual cycle in a maturing or a mature female, and it doesn't excuse me, it does in fact vary. We will have patients who say, I feel lousy right around the time of ovulation, so just before the bleeding starts or leading up to it, and I have patients who say, I feel lousy as I start to have my period. And the reaction to those two could, in theory, be different. Because you're in a different hormonal milieu, and so if you're having symptoms when you're high in the first part of that cycle, then perhaps we want to think about supplementing your progesterone. And if it's later in the cycle, so that could be something like they do have oral progesterone based contraceptives, but that also are the Depo-Provera shots, where you can get a long-lasting progesterone that will suppress ovulation and keep the LH down. Whereas if it's later on, sometimes the combination pills do a little bit better because what they do is that they regulate now. They put the level of the hormones under your control as a physician, rather than trust to the built-in mechanisms of the body. Because sometimes what happens is you'll see that you're getting spikes that are higher than in some cases, and that can lead to symptoms. Excuse me. We're going to backtrack. I think you've heard this at least a couple of times, maybe even 3 already, and that is the timing of the major clinical events in fatty acid oxidation disorders. And this also helps us understand what we're seeing in pubertal development and the menstrual cycle. So the hypoglycemia, because of the things that you heard both Dr. Corson and Dr. Getzman talk about, is maximum in the first 2, 3, 4 years of life. Somewhere between about age 4 and 6, it starts becoming less common, and after about age 6, you just don't see it very much at all. You can, under duress, significant long-term fasting, but mostly the symptoms are triggered by those other chemicals that are building up, and the energy deficit and its effects on the other organs. The rhabdo, in turn, is starting right about then, between about 4 and 6. There's often a period of quiescence between 6 and 12. The hypoglycemia is gone. The rhabdo can happen, but it may not be so frequent, and you get a little bit of a break from your disease, and then you hit puberty, where now rhabdo tends to be to kick in at its highest level, and sometimes that tapers off as the kids reach full maturity, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it becomes the long-term chronic pattern of adulthood, and then that cardiomyopathy can happen at any age, and so when we're talking about symptoms related to hormonal variation, we're really mostly talking about the rhabdo. And so the question that is really that just isn't an answer at this point is, what's the relationship of these clinical events to puberty? Why does it happen? What is it? Is it the gonadotropins? Is it the end hormones? It's not really understood. We do know that because you're growing faster, you've got an increased energy need, so that's probably got a little bit of something to do with it. It at least says that if you're not keeping up with those needs, and maybe even if you are, you're outstripping the ability of your damaged fatty acid oxidation cycle to keep up with it. Behavioral changes. We all know adolescents do what they want when they want, regardless of what we say as parents. Sorry about that, from my last group, my teen group. It's true. You lose control over them as they start spending more time at school, more time with their friends, and so things happen. That's surely not it for everybody, but it can exacerbate things. Activity level often change. Kids who we heard in our physical therapy talk, kids who have been sort of mildly interested in sports now go sports crazy, and they're out there practicing 2 or 3 hours a day, and with more extensive kinds of exercise, and so there's an activity component to this. An area where we know absolutely nothing about is that there's a whole set of inflammatory disorders that have a tendency to hit adults and not be so common in kids. And is that telling us something that we need to know for our fatty acid oxidation disorders? If we have these other things that are common in older kids and adults that we don't see in the younger ones, is there any relationship to that immunity axis? It's a really interesting question, but I don't know anybody who's looking at it. Maybe once we have a better description of what's going on, a better understanding of what's going on with the inflammation fatty acid oxidation disorders will have a better understanding, or at least be able to understand a little bit more about why, whether or not that's playing any role in this variation. And then finally, remember one of my comments from the last session, where I still knew a little bit about what I was talking about, we know that your symptoms are being caused in major part by one gene, whatever one it is that's causing your fatty acid oxidation disorder. But now you got those other 24,999 genes that are playing into your body. And so it's extremely possible, and I would even say probable, that there is a combination of pick a number, 5, 10, 100 genes that play into how your body responds to its fatty acid oxidation disorder, and those all could be things that also change as you mature, because there is a whole developmental set of genes that kick in, and other ones that stop as you start going through puberty. So there's a ton going on, and it's at this point we're really more excuse me, we're more responding to symptoms than we are trying to sort out trying to treat the root cause of this. So if the relationships of these events to puberty is a mystery, I have very little of scientific value that I can tell you about treatment. Now, that's not to say I can't say anything to you. I just want to watch my time here. Okay. I'm gonna change tactics here, and I'm gonna come back out and do the Oprah thing, because I'm gonna talk to you about some of your experiences and similarly explain some of the things that we've seen over the years in our kids with fatty acid oxidation disorders. And I do mean we, because this is not my experience. It's a sort of an accumulated experience. So I'm going to put this down. You can just kill the slides. I'm going to put this down, and I'm going to go grab a handheld mic. And that one. Already on. Before I start talking, I want to see if there's anybody out there that wants to share their horror story or good example of how you were able to deal with your maturing adolescence. Go for it.
Hi. So a new treatment that is getting more and more common is to give girls Mirena IUDs, and it's at a younger and younger age. And the thought is you're not giving systemic hormones, so you're not suppressing ovulation. And it's a tiny local dose of progesterone to stop the growth of the lining, which doctors vary on how many calories per day that costs you in energy. And so at Boston Children's, for kids with disorders of energy metabolism of any kind that contributes to their fatigue, they're now offering this as a treatment, and they're finding it highly successful. And several years back, they would offer it to like 18 and 17-year-olds, and now they're offering it to 14-year-olds. And I'm wondering if anyone knows if there's any downside to that. If you go as low as 14-year-old. 14, you're sort of at the average end conclusion of puberty, so maybe 14's fine, but I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on how young is too young.
Yeah, this is a very recent development. I don't know how long they've been doing it in Boston, but I don't know of many places that are in fact using it, and we haven't been yet. I think it's an area where I think it is worth here collaborating with the folks who deal with this all the time, and I don't think that's the endocrinologist. These are our adolescent medicine physicians. So I'm going to take this as a call to arms and say I'm going back to my adolescent docs and saying, hey, let's look into this because I cannot come up with a theoretical concern, but I also about the therapy. But I also don't know enough about the local effects and the long. That wasn't mine. Oh, good. I didn't know if I put my cap back on or not because I've got 3 pieces of electronics sitting there. It wouldn't be a good afternoon. So thank you for the observation, and like I said, this is why I love coming to meetings like this, because families inevitably are my inspiration for looking into new things.
Yeah. And just so in case people don't understand, so the goal of using the Mirena IUD is to stop menstruation, and that they achieve that in most cases. And the endocrinologist at Boston Children's said that the 16, 17, 18-year-olds said, this is the best thing I've ever done, energy-wise.
And that's the goal of the Depo-Provera, but of course, that's a systemic administration of a hormone, and so there's certainly going to be fewer side effects of a very small dose local, as opposed to the systemic high dose stuff. Did you have something?
So my daughter Ariella and my son Michael both have CBT2, and Ariella didn't really exhibit any kind of rhabdo symptoms until she started getting her period. And so she had 3 episodes of rhabdo in about 6 months, and after she had that 3rd episode, one of the things that they did was put her on the OrthoEvra patch. So she's been on that for 5 years now, and it's done quite a bit to kind of help bring her PMS and her period symptoms down to, they haven't gone away, but they're kind of more a dull roar, so that she's not feeling quite so much of an energy loss all of the time, but it hasn't totally solved it. She is, I mean, that week before and then during her period, she does still have a hard time and kind of sleeps a lot and feels a little miserable.
One of the things that I've run into with my patients is kids always grow up. Parents are always not ready for it, and so when I start talking to families about the potential need for contraceptives, their eyes just get big, you know. It's so I have to take a step back and, you know, explain to them why we're doing this, and I don't use slides with my patients. That's what our counselors do. I just draw bad figures on the pads, the paper that comes off the exam table. It works better for me. And so sometimes there's resistance to that, and it can be, you know, anything from personal to religious, so it takes a while to talk some families through that, and maybe some episodes of rhabdo.
She had also was just starting on the triheptanone trial, and it was one of the requirements of the trial that if you're of childbearing age, you have to be on birth control. But it was something that I had been asking for several months, and it took a little convincing to get the doctors to actually prescribe it for her.
I will say that in my case, There are things that I'm comfortable prescribing, and some things that I'm not, and I don't actually prescribe the contraceptives for my patients. I do refer them to either adolescent medicine or endocrinology, and the reason for that is that the medications are changing constantly. New forms are coming out, new options are available, and I don't even remember the names of all the flavors of antibiotics that are out there now. It's just too far away from what I do, and so rather than use something that I know because I had 2 or 3 patients over the years use them, I send them off to the experts, and this is where as a practitioner, you want to know your limits. Now, you may have somebody who works with you who's perfectly comfortable doing this, and if that's the case, that's great. But I work with my other specialists to help me decide what's the best form for any one individual. Other questions or comments?
So I guess I think about, like, you go online or you like read Facebook, like you see all these horror stories about puberty and like what to expect, and of course it gets scary. So as a parent whose child is going, in that direction, because that's just part of life, like, how do you prepare for the higher energy demands? As a parent, you want to be able to do whatever you can do, but like, is there anything that you can really do? I don't like the sit and wait until like you're just in there, but it sometimes feels like, is that just all we have? Like,
so in the end, here's my. Trying to take that. I was the model for that, by the way. Sometimes sit and wait is as good as you can do, or it's at least better than doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. Because that time scale can shift and does across the population, I can't tell you whether your child is going to start that process at age 10 or at age 12 or at age 14 in a really late onset of puberty, and so yes, we start having the conversation about it as kids start hitting 8 or 10, and in fact, most of my families are asking me that question long before I bring it up. Sometimes they come in for the second visit and they're 3-week-old and they're asking me about puberty, and I'm saying, can we just get to age 1 first, please? You may not be worried about it, but that's my concern right now. So I try not to. I don't dismiss it. Remember, parents are always right. And so if they're concerned about it, I will talk with them about it. But I do try to downplay it, and I say, look, that's a long ways away, and we'll talk about it a little bit closer. I will give them the 30-second spiel about, yes, things tend to get a little I will say can get a little out of kilter during puberty, but we'll deal with it as we get there. And the reason I corrected myself there is it doesn't always happen, right? I mean, you'll meet people at this meeting who will say, "Well, we didn't have any trouble," and those are the ones you want to slap, right? Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. So we revel in our success when they don't, and we blame somebody else when it does. Other questions or comments? Yes. These folks have been in Pittsburgh for 2 months. They're here from Turkey, and I'm going to be taking care of their daughter, who I just met yesterday. So please welcome them. You have a question.
Bizim en büyük sorunumuz burnu bile aksa, bir kere kussa, vesaire olduğu zaman hemen doktora aşı زمانی من دکترها بیولوژی دکترها از زمان نه زمان
Give it a try.
Okay, she says in case of emergency or any health conditions, for emergency we need to go to metabolic teams right away. And how often we do that without any emergencies?
Well, we'll spend a lot of time talking about this. In the last talk, Dr. Corson talked about going to the emergency room. You don't always have to go to the emergency room. Sometimes you'll just go to your pediatrician. And sometimes your pediatrician and I will talk together and try to decide whether she needs to go to the emergency room. And as she gets a little bit older, sometimes it's actually easier for us to treat at home. So it changes over time. You're welcome. Other questions? I'll finish up. Hopefully, maybe a little bit more positive than that. It's not that we know nothing. It's just that the variability from individual to individual makes it very hard to predict what to expect. When I talk to my families, I give them the full spectrum. I'd say, be aware that all hell can break loose. But hopefully it will be somewhere between 0 and 100, and we'll be able to help you through that. The last thing that you want to do is let your kids sit there and suffer. So if things aren't working out, you work with your team and say, what are the other options? And depending on whether it's premenstrual bleed or post, sometimes we can even get the endocrinologist involved, and they'll actually plot that out from a hormonal standpoint. And then the more information we have, the better off we will be. And as we get more information going forward, and we start to understand the questions better, then we have the opportunity to work on the answers. So I will stop there. I'm going to apologize because I actually have to take off. I have theater tickets tonight, and I want to go to the show. But I will be back tomorrow. So if you have questions, write them down so you don't forget them, and I'll be around tomorrow.